I had just set down my coffee when a thick contract was thrown onto my desk, knocking over my notebook. Standing before me was her, the interim CEO with cold eyes, pointing at the paper as if stamping out my future. Sign here if you want to continue in this industry. Otherwise, I'll make you disappear, everywhere. 48 countries. I looked straight into her eyes. I had traveled halfway around the world for this company, left my family behind, and learned 4 languages. And now, they wanted to bury me? Not happening. They were about to learn an expensive lesson. My name is Charlotte Blake. I'm 35, an American international strategy consultant at Orbis Terra Consulting. 5 years ago, I was tasked with leading our global expansion team, growing our presence from 3 markets to 22 countries. It wasn't the path I expected when I joined the company, but it became my life's work. I started at the bottom of Orbis Terra, fresh out of my MBA, armed with theoretical knowledge but little real-world experience. I was just another analyst among dozens. What set me apart wasn't brilliance or connections. It was my willingness to take on the assignments nobody wanted. When the company decided to expand internationally, the senior executives viewed it as a risky distraction. The domestic market was comfortable and profitable. Why venture into unknown territories with different regulations, cultures, and competitors? But the board insisted, and they needed someone to lead the initiative, someone expendable if it failed. "Charlotte, how's your passport looking?" my director asked one Friday afternoon, not even looking up from his computer. "Current. Why?" "You're going to Jakarta next week. We need someone on the ground to assess potential partnerships." That first trip was meant to be 2 weeks. I stayed for 2 months, navigating bureaucracy, building relationships with local officials, and understanding market dynamics that couldn't be gleaned from reports. I learned enough Bahasa Indonesia to show respect in meetings. I ate street food with potential partners instead of dining at hotel restaurants. I listened more than I spoke. When I returned, I had secured our first major international partnership. The executives were surprised but unmoved. "Beginner's luck," one whispered loud enough for me to hear. Then came Nairobi, Mumbai, Santiago, and a dozen other cities. I lived out of a suitcase, crossing time zones weekly, missing holidays and birthdays. Each market required a different approach, different relationships. In some countries, government connections were paramount. In others, it was about technological integration or cultural sensitivity. I built systems that worked within each local context while maintaining our global standards. I recruited talented locals who understood nuances I never could. I handled crises at 3 a.m. because somewhere in the world, one of our offices was always open. And slowly, our international division grew from a corporate afterthought into the company's fastest-growing segment. My network of relationships was built on trust rather than just contracts. When problems arose, as they inevitably did, people called me directly instead of threatening legal action. I knew the names of their children, remembered their cultural holidays, understood their local challenges. After 5 years, our international operations accounted for 40% of company revenue. The board finally took notice. Suddenly, the executives who had dismissed global expansion as a fool's errand were eager to claim credit. That's when Victoria Lang entered the picture. Victoria came from our largest competitor with an impressive title, Executive Vice President of International Operations. She was brought in above me, despite having no experience in most of the markets I had developed. Her resume was polished, her wardrobe impeccable, her Harvard MBA prominently displayed in her new corner office. Our first meeting seemed cordial enough. Victoria invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant, ordered expensive wine, and asked thoughtful questions about our operations. "Charlotte, I'm so impressed with what you've built," she said, swirling her wine. "Tell me about your process for identifying new markets." I explained my methodology, the indicators I tracked, how I balanced quantitative data with on-the-ground intelligence. "Fascinating. And how do you maintain relationships across such diverse regions?" I shared my communication systems, the regular check-ins, the cultural adaptations. "This is incredibly valuable. Would you mind putting together some documents outlining these processes? For my reference, of course. I spent weeks compiling comprehensive guides, detailed flowcharts, and contact information for key stakeholders. Victoria thanked me with a handwritten note and a small gift basket. Then the changes began. Subtle at first, my direct reports started getting instructions from Victoria that contradicted my direction. Meeting invitations arrived last minute or not at all. My travel requests were denied with vague explanations about budget constraints, while Victoria flew first class to cities I had established. 3 months after her arrival, I opened a trade magazine to find Victoria's face on the cover with the headline, "The Architect of Global Expansion: How Victoria Lang Transformed Orbis Terra into an International Powerhouse." The article detailed her innovative approaches to entering emerging markets, approaches I had created and explained to her over lunch. It quoted partners I had spent years cultivating, now praising Victoria's vision and leadership. When I confronted her privately, her smile never wavered. "Charlotte, you're a valuable executor, but strategy comes from the executive level. Surely you understand that." I watched as she gradually took center stage at conferences where I should have been speaking, led client meetings I'd arranged, and claimed credit for relationships I had nurtured. Each time, she positioned me as her assistant or implementation specialist, never acknowledging my strategic contributions. The breaking point came during a strategy session for our North African expansion. I sat in the back row, watching Victoria present my comprehensive analysis, slides I had prepared, data I had gathered, recommendations I had formulated. She hadn't changed so much as a font color. After the presentation, the CEO announced Victoria's promotion to Chief International Officer, praising her visionary leadership in previously untapped markets. That evening, I started documenting everything, every email, presentation, market analysis, and meeting notes I had created, every successful strategy Victoria had claimed, every relationship I had established that she now leveraged. I wasn't sure what I would do with this information, but I knew I needed evidence of my contributions. A month later, an opportunity emerged. A rising strategic consulting firm based in South Korea approached me about heading their global expansion efforts. They had heard about my work, not from official channels, but from partners who knew who really built Orbis Terra's international presence. I decided to use this offer as leverage, not to leave immediately, but to finally gain recognition for my work. I requested a meeting with Victoria, hoping she might match their offer or at least acknowledge my value to the company. "I've received an interesting opportunity," I began, outlining the position without revealing the company name. Victoria's expression remained neutral. "You're certainly free to pursue other options, Charlotte. However, I should remind you that all our international strategies and relationships belong to Orbis Terra. I developed those strategies and relationships," I countered. "As an employee executing company directives, nothing more." Her voice was ice. "Besides, your role here is secure. Why risk starting over?" I left the meeting with nothing resolved. 3 days later, Victoria's assistant delivered a new non-compete agreement to my desk. Unlike the standard contract I'd signed years ago, this one prohibited me from working in any international consulting capacity in any of our operating countries for 3 years after leaving Orbis Terra. That morning in her office, coffee spilling across my notes, Victoria stood over me with that smirk I had come to despise. "Sign here if you want to continue in this industry. Otherwise, I'll make you disappear. Everywhere. 48 countries." I signed the document, not out of fear, but because I already had a plan forming. A plan that would require patience, precision, and the appearance of defeat. For the next 90 days, I became invisible. I stopped attending industry events. I removed myself from professional social networks. I minimized my presence in email chains. To all appearances, I had accepted my diminished role and Victoria's ascendance. But while I appeared to withdraw, I was meticulously preparing my response. First, I consulted with 3 different international trade lawyers about the enforceability of my new non-compete agreement, the consensus. While challenging to fight directly, there were significant gray areas and jurisdictional limitations. This agreement covers countries where Orbis Terra currently operates. One lawyer pointed out, but it says nothing about countries where they don't yet have a presence. I began researching markets that Orbis Terra had overlooked, smaller countries with unique needs, regions they had deemed too challenging, industries they had written off as unprofitable. I discovered dozens of opportunities hidden in plain sight. Next, I reconnected with contacts outside the scope of my agreement, investors who had approached me over the years, industry associations I had joined independently, partners who had moved to new companies not covered by the restrictions. With careful planning and seed funding from 2 angel investors who had followed my work, I incorporated Phoenix Axis Advisory, a strategic consulting firm specializing in navigating the intersection of technology and international cultural dynamics. Our focus would be on markets and niches deliberately ignored by Orbis Terra, operating just beyond the boundaries of my non-compete agreement. For 3 months, I worked nights and weekends from my apartment, building infrastructure, developing methodologies, and crafting service offerings. I created digital systems that could operate across borders without physical offices. I assembled a network of independent consultants in strategic locations, people I had met throughout my career who respected my work. When I finally resigned from Orbis Terra, Victoria barely looked up from her computer. "Your access will be terminated immediately. Security will escort you out. Don't forget the terms of your agreement." I simply nodded and walked out, carrying only a small box of personal items. As the security guard accompanied me to the elevator, he whispered, "Good luck, Ms. Blake. This place won't be the same without you." My first 3 months as an entrepreneur were lean. I had 2 clients, both small companies looking to enter markets Orbis Terra considered too small to bother with. I worked 18-hour days, handling everything from high-level strategy to administrative details. I ate ramen noodles and canceled my premium streaming services to extend my runway. But those first 2 clients achieved remarkable results. 1. A specialized medical device manufacturer secured distribution in 5 Southeast Asian countries Victoria had dismissed as logistically problematic. The other, a sustainable agriculture technology provider, established partnerships across Caribbean nations Orbis Terra had deemed too fragmented to be worthwhile. Word spread. By the 6-month mark, Phoenix Axis Advisory had 9 clients across 4 continents. I hired my first 2 employees, brilliant consultants who had been overlooked by larger firms because they lacked prestigious degrees or conventional backgrounds. At the 9-month point, an industry publication ran a small feature on the Phoenix model of international expansion, highlighting our success in markets others had abandoned. I was invited to speak at a regional business conference, nothing prestigious, but a start. Meanwhile, I heard through my network that Victoria was struggling. Without my knowledge and relationships, Orbis Terra's international division was missing targets. Existing partnerships were deteriorating. New market entries were stalling. Victoria blamed external factors, political instability, economic headwinds, pandemic aftereffects. But the board was growing impatient. 18 months after my departure, I received an unexpected lunch invitation from Jonathan Reed, a member of Orbis Terra's board whom I had briefly worked with years earlier. We met at a quiet restaurant far from both our offices. After pleasantries, Jonathan leaned forward. "I'll be direct, Charlotte. Were you the actual architect of our international success?" I chose my words carefully. "I built the strategies and relationships that drove our global expansion. I can't speak to how they've been managed since my departure." He nodded slowly. "The board is concerned. Our international performance has declined significantly. Clients are asking specifically for you. Partners are less cooperative. We're losing market share in regions where we once dominated." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Victoria presents beautiful reports and impressive projections, but the results aren't materializing. When pressed for solutions, she lacks substantive answers. He sighed. "We made a mistake, Charlotte." I took a sip of water. I'm sorry to hear about the company's challenges, Jonathan, but I'm focused on building Phoenix Axis now. Would you consider returning? The board would ensure appropriate recognition and compensation this time. I smiled. I appreciate the offer, but I've found that building something new is more fulfilling than fixing something broken. We parted amicably, but the conversation confirmed what I had suspected. Victoria's facade was cracking under the pressure of actually delivering results. 2 months later, I attended my first major international conference as the founder of Phoenix Axis. Victoria was also there, representing Orbis Terra on a panel about emerging markets. I sat quietly in the audience, taking notes. During the Q&A session, a Malaysian business leader challenged Victoria on her assessment of Southeast Asian regulatory frameworks. Her response revealed fundamental misunderstandings of recent policy changes. As she fumbled through generalities, I noticed several audience members exchanging knowing glances. After the panel, that same Malaysian businessman approached me. Ms. Blake, your reputation precedes you. Would you have time for coffee tomorrow? I have some regional expansion questions that require accurate insights. By the end of the conference, I'd secured 3 new major clients and received invitations to speak at 2 prestigious industry events. Victoria, meanwhile, had been notably absent from networking functions following her panel appearance. 48 hours after the conference, an industry colleague texted me, "Heard VL just got transferred to the Denver office. No more international portfolio." I allowed myself a small smile, but reminded myself that my goal wasn't Victoria's downfall. It was Phoenix Axis's success. Still, there was a certain poetic justice in watching someone who had tried to bury me professionally now struggling to maintain relevance. 3 weeks later, I received an email from Orbis Terra's new international director, a seasoned executive I respected from previous industry encounters. He proposed a meeting to discuss potential collaborative opportunities. The meeting was straightforward. Orbis Terra wanted to engage Phoenix Axis as an exclusive strategic partner to rebuild their international division. They would provide resources and institutional backing. We would provide strategy, relationships, and implementation expertise. Most importantly, I would have full autonomy over approach and execution. The board recognizes that we lost something invaluable when you left, the new director admitted. We'd like to repair that relationship while respecting the business you've built. The proposed partnership offered significant advantages: accelerated growth for Phoenix Axis, expanded resources, and validation of our approach. It would also allow me to reclaim and advance the international framework I'd originally created, this time with proper recognition. After careful consideration and negotiation of terms that protected Phoenix Axis's independence, I agreed to the partnership. The official announcement generated considerable industry attention, with several publications noting the unusual situation of a large corporation essentially subcontracting its international strategy to a former employee's startup. 1 week after the partnership announcement, I received an internal email that had been forwarded by a sympathetic board member. It was Victoria's formal protest against the Phoenix Axis partnership, claiming I had violated my non-compete agreement and stolen proprietary strategies. The board's response was brief. After legal review, we find no violation of contractual terms. Ms. Blake's current operations fall outside the scope of her agreement. Furthermore, the board has determined that this partnership serves Orbis Terra's best interests regardless of prior personnel matters. I printed that email and kept it in my desk drawer. Not to gloat, but as a reminder of how far I had come. 5 years after being threatened with professional extinction, Phoenix Axis Advisory operated in 5 countries with a team of over 20 professionals. We advised governments, multinational corporations, and innovative startups on international expansion strategies. Our client retention rate exceeded 90%, and we had a waiting list despite premium fees. Victoria eventually left Orbis Terra for a mid-level position at a regional firm. We occasionally crossed paths at industry events, where she would nod curtly before finding reasons to be elsewhere. I never felt the need to gloat or remind her of our history. Success was vindication enough. The partnership with Orbis Terra evolved into a mutually beneficial relationship. They regained their international momentum, and Phoenix Axis accessed resources that accelerated our growth. Our complementary strengths created something more valuable than either organization could have built alone. Looking back, I realized that Victoria's attempt to eliminate me professionally had actually forced me to create something far more meaningful than the corporate role I had lost. Had she recognized my contributions rather than claiming them as her own, I might have remained a loyal employee, continuing to build someone else's vision rather than my own. During a keynote address at the Global Strategy Summit, an event where, years earlier, Victoria had presented my work as her own, I shared this reflection. They tried to bury me in silence. I used that silence to build an empire. The best revenge isn't destroying others, it's creating something they can never control. After my speech, a young consultant approached me, eyes bright with ambition and uncertainty. "I'm in a similar situation to where you were," she confessed. "My boss takes credit for my work, and I feel stuck. How did you find the courage to leave and start over?" I considered her question carefully. I didn't start over. I built on what I already knew. The relationships, the knowledge, the strategies, those belonged to me regardless of who claimed them on paper. Remember that what makes you valuable can't be taken away unless you surrender it. She nodded slowly. But weren't you afraid of failing, of proving them right? Terrified, I admitted. But I realized something important. Staying in a situation where my contributions were stolen felt worse than the possibility of failing on my own terms. Fear of failure is natural, but regret is unbearable. As I watched her walk away, shoulders slightly straighter, I thought about all the talent wasted in organizations that fail to recognize and nurture it. Victoria had viewed me as a threat to be neutralized rather than an asset to be developed. In doing so, she had inadvertently launched her greatest competitor. That evening, I returned to my hotel room and found an email from Jonathan Reed, who had since retired from Orbis Terra's board. "Watched your keynote online. Reminded me of our lunch conversation years ago. Wanted you to know, the board now uses the Victoria lesson as a case study in how not to manage talent. Your legacy at Orbis Terra ended up being greater than anyone anticipated, just not in the way anyone expected." I smiled at the irony. In trying to make me disappear from 48 countries, Victoria had instead made me unforgettable. My journey wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to let someone else define my worth or limit my potential. The contract that was meant to constrain me became the boundary that forced me to explore new territories. The relationships Victoria thought she could claim proved to be built on personal trust that couldn't be transferred on an organizational chart. Most importantly, I learned that true success isn't measured by titles or organizational authority, but by the impact of your work and the integrity with which you pursue it. Victoria had all the trappings of success without the substance. I had to rebuild from scratch but created something authentic and enduring. As Phoenix Axis continued to grow, I made it a point to publicly recognize team members' contributions, to share credit generously, and to create advancement pathways for talented individuals. The culture we built stood in deliberate contrast to the environment I had left behind. We celebrated collective achievement while honoring individual excellence. Sometimes, late at night in my office overlooking the city lights, I would think about that moment when Victoria threw the contract on my desk, coffee spilling across my notes, her threat echoing in the air. I no longer felt anger, just a quiet appreciation for the catalyst that forced me to reimagine my path. They had threatened to make me disappear from 48 countries. Instead, I had built a presence that no contract could constrain and no corporate politics could diminish. The lesson wasn't that betrayal makes you stronger or that obstacles are blessings in disguise. Those are comforting fictions. The reality is simpler and harder. What matters isn't what happens to you, but what you build from it. My name is Charlotte Blake, and this is my empire, built from silence, forged in adversity, and ultimately, more valuable than anything that could have been given to me or taken away.